The next day, the young officers returned to the dark briefing room. They had spent the night thinking about Commander Velthar's stories. Some had bad dreams about human soldiers with missing arms who refused to die. Velthar entered the room, carrying a metal box. He set it on the table and looked at the 20 young faces staring at him. "Today, I will tell you about Kepler Station," he said. It was a mining station in human space. When the war started, we thought it would be easy to capture. He opened the metal box. Inside were pieces of twisted metal and broken tools. "These came from Kepler Station," Velthar said, picking up a bent piece of steel. "This was once a mining drill. The humans turned it into a weapon." Lieutenant Kreemall looked at the broken metal. "Sir, how many human soldiers were at the station?" 50 soldiers, Velthar replied, "and 150 civilians, miners, engineers, doctors, and their families." A young officer raised her hand. "How many Nexari troops did you send to capture it?" Velthar's expression grew dark. 3,000. The room became very quiet. "We thought it would take 1 day," Velthar continued. "It took 47 days, and we never really captured it." He pressed a button on his control pad. A hologram showed a large space station orbiting a rocky planet. "Kepler Station was built for mining, not fighting," Velthar said. "It had no weapons, no military shields, no defense systems, just mining equipment and civilian living areas." The hologram zoomed in to show the inside of the station. "The human commander was Captain J1, Velthar continued. "He was an engineer, not a soldier. When our fleet arrived, he could have surrendered. His people would have lived." "Why did he not surrender?" asked a young officer. Velthar picked up another piece of metal from the box. "Because 3 days before we arrived, humans on another station had surrendered. We kept them as prisoners for labor work. Captain J1 heard about this and decided his people would rather die free than live as slaves." He held up the twisted metal. "This was a cutting torch. Captain J1's people used it to cut through the station walls and create mazes. When we entered the station, we found ourselves trapped in metal tunnels that led nowhere." The hologram showed the inside of the station. The walls had been cut and moved to create a confusing maze of passages. "It took us 6 days to find our way through the first level," Velthar said. "Every turn was a trap. Every room was a danger. The humans had turned their home into a death maze." A young officer asked, "What kind of traps?" Velthar's 3 eyes looked distant, remembering. "Mining explosives hidden in the walls. Acid from mining equipment sprayed from the ceiling. Sharp metal pieces that fell when you stepped on certain floor panels." He put the metal piece back in the box and picked up something else. It looked like a medical tool. "This belonged to Dr. So Young," he said. "She was the station's doctor. We found her on day 23 in the medical bay." The young officers leaned forward. Dr. So Young had turned the medical bay into a fortress, Velthar continued. "She had 30 wounded humans with her. When we broke through her barricades, she was performing surgery on a human soldier while laser fire was hitting the walls around her." Lieutenant Kreemall shook his head in disbelief. "She continued operating during battle?" "Yes," Velthar said. "The human soldier had a piece of metal in his chest near his heart. Dr. So Young was removing it while our weapons were shooting at her. She never stopped working." The hologram showed the medical bay, destroyed and burned from battle. "When we finally captured the medical bay, we found something strange," Velthar continued. "Dr. So Young had saved not just human wounded, but also 3 Nexari soldiers who had been hurt in the fighting." A young officer looked confused. "She helped our soldiers?" "Yes," Velthar nodded. "She had given them medical care and food. When we asked why, she said, 'Wounded soldiers are patients, not enemies.'" He paused and looked around the room. "But here is the part that still gives me nightmares," Velthar said. Dr. So Young had also been recording everything, every surgery, every treatment, every new wound she saw. She was learning how our bodies work so other human doctors would know how to hurt us better. The room grew cold and quiet. "She saved our wounded soldiers so she could study us," Velthar continued. "Even Her mercy was a weapon. He put the medical tool back and picked up a small device. On day 35 we met Hyun-soo, Belthar said. He was 16 years old, a boy, not a soldier. The young officers waited. Hyun-soo had been helping in the station's power plant, Belthar continued. When we finally reached the reactor level, we found him alone with the main power controls. The hologram showed a young human male with his hands on a large red button. Hyun-soo told us he would destroy the reactor if we came any closer, Belthar said. We laughed. A human child trying to threaten trained Nexari warriors. Lieutenant Kremol asked, "What happened?" Belthar's voice became very quiet. He pushed the button. The young officers gasped. Hyun-soo destroyed the reactor and killed himself to deny us the station's power, Belthar said. A 16-year-old boy chose death over capture. His last words were, "Tell Captain Jae-won the power is off." The hologram showed the destroyed reactor room. Without power, the station's life support began to fail, Belthar continued. We thought the remaining humans would surrender quickly, did they? Asked a young officer. Belthar shook his head. No, they began using the dead. The young officers looked shocked. The humans collected bodies from both sides, Belthar explained. They used Nexari corpses as shields when they moved through the corridors. They wore our dead soldiers' armor to confuse us. They made weapons from our bones and scales. A young officer made a sick sound. But the worst thing was what they did with their own dead, Belthar continued. They left human bodies in places where we would find them. But the bodies were not just dead. They were messages. Messages, Lieutenant Kremol asked. The humans arranged their dead to show us tactical information, Belthar explained. A body pointing left meant enemy forces that way. A body with 3 fingers raised meant 3 squads coming. They used their own dead friends as a communication system. The room was completely silent. On day 47, we reached the EI command center, Belthar said. We found Captain Jae-won alone at his desk. He was writing something on paper with a pen. The hologram showed a tired human male in torn clothes writing calmly, while explosions happened outside his door. Captain Jae-won looked up when we entered, Belthar continued. He finished writing and handed me the paper. It was a complete report of everything that had happened during the siege. Every trap we had fallen into, every mistake we had made, every weakness in our tactics he had discovered. Belthar reached into the box and pulled out a piece of paper. This is that report, he said. Captain Jae-won had spent 47 days learning how to fight us. Then he gave us all his knowledge. Lieutenant Kremol looked confused. Why? Because he knew he was going to die, Belthar said. But he also knew that other humans would read his report. He turned his defeat into a victory for future human forces. Belthar put the paper back in the box and closed it. We captured Kepler Station on day 47, he said. But we lost more soldiers taking it than the humans lost defending it. And when it was over, we realized something terrible. The young officers waited. The humans at Kepler Station were not soldiers, Belthar said. They were miners and engineers and doctors. If civilians could fight us like this, what could their real soldiers do? He walked toward the door. Tomorrow I will tell you about what their real soldiers could do, Belthar said, and you will understand why the siege of Kepler Station was not our victory. It was our warning. The door closed behind him, leaving the young officers alone with their thoughts and the metal box full of broken human tools that had been turned into weapons. Outside, they could hear the sound of the wind blowing across the training grounds where new Nexari soldiers learned to fight wars they hoped they would never have to face. On the 3rd day, Commander Belthar entered the briefing room carrying a small black box. The young officers noticed he walked more slowly than usual, and his good eyes seemed tired. Today we talk about the soul's pride, he said, setting the black box on the table. It was a human warship that changed how we think about space combat. Lieutenant Kremol had been reading about human ships. Sir, human ships are smaller than ours. They have weaker weapons and less armor. Belthar opened the black box. Inside was a piece of twisted metal with strange markings on it. This came from the soul's pride, he said, holding up the metal piece. It is the only thing left of that ship and the 3,000 Nexari soldiers who boarded it. The room became very quiet. The Soul's Pride was damaged in a battle near the Vega system, Velthar continued. Our sensors showed the ship had no power and was drifting in space. The crew was sending distress signals asking for help. He pressed a button on his control pad. A hologram showed a large human warship floating dead in space. Admiral Kexthar commanded our fleet, Velthar said. He saw an opportunity to capture human technology and maybe some prisoners. He ordered 3 ships to dock with the Soul's Pride. A young officer asked, what was wrong with the ship? The power systems were failing, Velthar replied. The Yadai life support was barely working. Our sensors detected about 200 humans on board, most of them wounded. The hologram zoomed in to show damage to the ship's hull. I was part of the boarding team, Velthar continued. We cut through the ship's airlock and entered the main corridor. The lights were dim and there was emergency power only. He touched the scar over his blind eye. The first thing we noticed was the smell, he said. Death and blood and something else. Something that made our scales crawl with fear. Lieutenant Kremol leaned forward. What did you find? Bodies, Velthar said simply. Human bodies everywhere. But they were not just dead. They had been arranged. The young officers looked confused. The humans had placed their dead comrades in specific positions, Velthar explained. Some were sitting at control panels. Others were standing at doorways. They looked like they were still working, still guarding their posts. The hologram showed the inside of the ship with human bodies positioned at various stations. We moved deeper into the ship, Velthar continued. In the medical bay, we found Dr. Yunji still alive. She was treating wounded humans with medical equipment that barely worked. A young officer asked, did she surrender? Velthar's expression grew dark. She welcomed us. She asked if we needed medical help. She offered to treat our wounded soldiers. That seems normal, said Lieutenant Kremol. Yes, Velthar nodded, until we realized that Dr. Yunji had explosives surgically implanted under her skin. The young officers gasped. She had cut herself open and placed small bombs inside her body, Velthar continued. Then she had sewn herself back together. She was a walking weapon disguised as a doctor. The hologram showed medical equipment and bloody surgical tools. When we tried to capture her, Dr. Yunji triggered the explosives, Velthar said. She killed herself and 8 of my soldiers. Her last words were, tell Colonel Taehyun that the medical bay is clear. A young officer asked, who was Colonel Taehyun? The ship's commanding officer, Velthar replied. We found him on the bridge with 12 other humans. They were all alive but very weak from their wounds. The hologram showed the ship's command center with humans slumped over control panels. Colonel Taehyun was sitting in the captain's chair, Velthar continued. He had a piece of metal sticking out of his chest, but he was still giving orders to his crew. Lieutenant Kremol asked, what kind of orders? Velthar picked up the twisted metal from the black box. He was telling them to activate something. Called Final Protocol, he said. We did not know what that meant. The young officers waited. Colonel Taehyun looked at us when we entered the bridge, Velthar continued. He smiled. It was not a happy smile. It was the smile of someone who had won a game that no one else knew they were playing. The hologram zoomed in on the human. Colonel's face. He said, welcome aboard the Soul's Pride. I am Colonel Taehyun. Thank you for bringing your entire fleet within range. A cold feeling filled the room. Within range of what? Asked a young officer. The Soul's Pride was not a damaged warship, Velthar said slowly. It was a trap. The entire ship had been turned into one massive bomb. The young officers looked shocked. The humans had spent 3 months preparing to die, Velthar continued. They had removed all the ship's weapons and armor. They replaced everything with explosives, tons and tons of explosives. The hologram showed the ship's interior filled with explosive devices. But why did they stay on the ship? Lieutenant Kremol asked. Because someone had to make it look real, Velthar replied. Someone had to send the distress signals. Someone had to act wounded and helpless. Someone had to make sure we brought our entire fleet close enough. He held up the piece of metal again. Sergeant Bitna was the ship's demolitions expert. he said. She had wired the explosives throughout the ship, but the detonation system needed to be triggered manually from the engine room. A young officer asked, could she not set a timer? She could have. Velthar nodded. But a timer might fail, or we might detect it and disarm it. The only way to be sure was for someone to stay behind and push the button. The room was completely silent. Sergeant Bitna volunteered. Velthar continued. She said goodbye to her friends on the bridge. Then she went to the engine room and waited. The hologram showed a human female sitting alone next to a large red button. Colonel Tae Hyun gave us one final message, Velthar said. He told us that humans fight differently than other species. He said that other species fight to live, but humans are willing to fight to die if it means winning. Velthar's voice became very quiet. Then he gave the order. Bitna, execute final protocol. The young officers held their breath. Sergeant Bitna pushed the button. Velthar said. The soul's pride exploded with the force of a small star. The explosion destroyed our 3 boarding ships instantly. The blast damaged 6 other ships in our fleet. He put the metal piece back in the black box. I survived because I was near an airlock when the explosion happened. Velthar continued. The blast threw me into space. I floated there for 2 hours before a rescue ship found me. Lieutenant Kremal asked, how many Nexari soldiers died? 3,000 on the boarding ships, Velthar replied. Another 800 on the damaged fleet ships. Almost 4,000 soldiers killed by 200 humans who chose to die. A young officer shook her head. That is not warfare. That is madness. Velthar looked at her with his good eyes. No, he said. That is strategy. The humans traded 200 lives to destroy almost 4,000 of our soldiers and 7 of our ships. In one battle, they reduced our fleet strength by 30%. He walked closer to the young officers. But the real damage was not to our ships, he continued. It was to our minds. After the soul's pride, every time we found a damaged human ship, we were afraid. Every time humans offered to surrender, we wondered if they were planning to explode. The hologram showed other battles from the war. The humans began using our fear against us, Velthar said. They would fake damage to their ships to make us hesitate. They would pretend to surrender just to see us back away in terror. Lieutenant, Kremal looked confused. But if they were pretending, why did we not call their bluff? Velthar touched his scarred face again. Because we learned something about humans that day, he said. We learned that they were not pretending. Every time they said they would blow up their ship, they really meant it. Every time they offered to die, they were telling the truth. He closed the black box. Crew Chief Inho was on the Soul's Pride that day, Velthar continued. He was an old human soldier, very experienced. Before the ship exploded, he sent a message to all human forces. What did the message say? Asked a young officer. Velthar walked toward the door. He said, this is how we fight. This is how we win. Not by living through battles, but by making sure our deaths count for something. The door started to close. Behind him. Tomorrow I will tell you about the forest world where we learned that humans could turn an entire planet into a weapon, he said. And you will understand why we stopped trying to capture human ships. The young officer sat in the dark room, thinking about Colonel Tae Hyun and Sergeant Bitna and Dr. Yoonji. They thought about humans who would cut bombs into their own bodies and smile while they waited to die. Outside, the stars looked different, now less friendly, more dangerous, especially the stars in human space. On the 4th day, Commander Velthar entered the briefing room carrying a cloth bag. The young officers had been talking quietly among themselves, but they stopped when they saw his expression. His scarred face looked older, more tired. Today, we discuss Verdania 3, he said, setting the bag on the table. It was a jungle world where we learned that humans can disappear into any environment and make it their ally. He opened the cloth bag and pulled out a handful of leaves and strange roots. These plants grow on Verdania 3, Velthar said. They are poisonous to most species in the galaxy. They will kill a Nexari in minutes if eaten. Lieutenant Kremal looked at the plants with curiosity. Why do you carry poison plants, sir? Velthar held up one of the roots. Because Major Kyung-ho and his soldiers ate them every day for 8 months. They learned to live on food that should have killed them. Young officers looked shocked. The jungle campaign lasted 1 year, Veltar continued. We sent 15,000 soldiers to capture a human research base on Verdania 3. The base had maybe 300 human soldiers defending it. He pressed a button on his control pad. A hologram showed a thick green jungle with tall trees and heavy fog. Verdania 3 was perfect for us, Veltar said. Our thermal vision works well in humid air. Our thick scales protect us from thorns and insects. The heavy gravity makes us stronger. The hologram zoomed in to show Nexari soldiers moving easily through the jungle. The humans should have been helpless, Veltar continued. They had thin skin that insects could bite through. They could not see as well in the fog. The gravity was too strong for their light bones. A young officer asked, "So you captured the base quickly?" Velthar's expression grew dark. "We never captured the base. We never even found it." The room became quiet. Major Kyung-ho was in command of human forces on Verdania 3, Veltar said. He was a special forces officer who had trained in jungle warfare on 12 different worlds. The hologram showed a human male with green paint on his face, almost invisible among the jungle plants. On the first day we landed our troops near where our sensors said the human base was located, Veltar continued. We sent scout teams to find the enemy positions. He pulled another plant from the bag, this one with sharp thorns. None of our scouts came back, he said simply. Lieutenant Kremal looked confused. What happened to them? They vanished, Veltar replied. We found their equipment scattered through the jungle. Their weapons were gone. Their communication devices were destroyed. But we found no bodies. The hologram showed broken Nexari gear hanging from tree branches. At first we thought they had been killed by jungle predators, Veltar continued. Verdania 3 has many dangerous animals. Large cats with poisonous claws, snake-like creatures that can swallow a soldier whole. A young officer asked. But that was not what happened. No, Veltar said. On the second day we found Sergeant Thex hanging from a tree. He was still alive, but barely. The young officers leaned forward. Sergeant Thex told us he had been captured by something that looked like a walking plant, Veltar continued. It had grabbed him from behind and dragged him through the jungle for hours. The hologram showed thick jungle vines and moving shadows. We thought Sergeant Thex was confused from his injuries, Veltar said. Walking plants do not exist. But then we realized what he had really seen. He held up some of the leaves from the bag. Major Kyung-ho had taught his soldiers to cover themselves with jungle plants, Veltar explained. They wore leaves and vines like clothing. They moved so slowly and quietly that they looked like part of the forest. The hologram showed a human soldier covered in plants, nearly invisible against the jungle background. But that was just the beginning, Veltar continued. The humans had been on Verdania 3 for 2 years before the war started. They had learned to live like the jungle animals. A young officer asked, What do you mean? Veltar pulled out a strange tool from the bag. It looked like it was made from animal bones and plant fibers. The humans stopped using their technology, he said. No metal weapons that our sensors could detect. No electronic devices that gave off signals. They made tools from bones and stones and wood. Lieutenant Kremal examined the bone tool. This looks primitive. Primitive but effective, Veltar replied. Private Yejin used tools like this to kill over 300 Nexari soldiers in 10 months. The room grew cold. Yejin was a human sniper, Veltar continued. But she did not use a normal sniper rifle. She used a bow made from jungle wood and arrows carved from animal bones. The hologram showed a human female drawing back a wooden bow, almost invisible in the tree branches. Our armor was designed to stop energy weapons and metal bullets, Veltar said. But a sharp piece of bone fired from close range could go through our scales like they were paper. He put the bone tool back in the bag. For 300 days Yejin hunted our officers, Veltar continued. She would hide in the trees for hours waiting for the perfect shot. She learned our patrol schedules, our communication codes, our command structure. A young officer asked, Did you ever find her? Velthar shook his head. She found us. Every morning we would discover another dead officer with a bone arrow in his throat. Every evening we would find threatening messages carved into trees. The hologram showed Nexari words carved into jungle trees. The messages were in our own language, Velthar said. Yejin had learned to read and write Nexari. Her messages told us exactly how many officers she had killed, and how many more she planned to kill. Lieutenant Kremol looked disturbed. That is psychological warfare. Yes, Velthar nodded. But it was also accurate intelligence. Yejin always kept her promises. If she said she would kill 5 officers in a week, exactly 5 officers died. He pulled another item from the bag. It was a small bottle filled with green liquid. After 6 months, we started getting sick, Velthar said. Our soldiers were developing strange illnesses. Fevers, stomach problems, skin rashes. A young officer asked, "Jungle diseases?" "No," Velthar replied. "Poison." The humans had learned which jungle plants were toxic to Nexari. They were putting poison in our water supplies. The hologram showed human soldiers collecting plants and grinding them into powder. Medic Jinwoo was an expert in alien biology, Velthar continued. He had studied Nexari anatomy and knew exactly which toxins would hurt us without killing us quickly. Lieutenant Kremol looked confused. Why did they not want to kill you quickly? Because sick soldiers are worse than dead soldiers, Velthar explained. A dead soldier is replaced by 1 healthy soldier. A sick soldier needs 3 healthy soldiers to carry him and take care of him. The young officers began to understand. Jinwoo was not trying to kill us, Velthar continued. He was trying to make us weak and slow and scared, and it worked. He put the bottle back in the bag. But the worst part was Scout HFY, Velthar said, his voice becoming very quiet. The young officers waited. HFY was a human reconnaissance specialist, Velthar continued. She had been studying our culture and religion before the war started. The hologram showed a small human female with short black hair, barely visible in the jungle shadows. HFY learned about our funeral customs, Velthar said. She learned which ceremonies we perform for our dead warriors. She learned how we arrange bodies to show respect. A cold feeling filled the room. When soldiers from my unit died, we would find their bodies the next morning arranged in traditional Nexari funeral positions, Velthar continued. HFY was giving our dead the proper ceremonies. Lieutenant Kremol asked, That seems respectful. Yes, Velthar nodded, until we realized what else she was doing. The hologram showed Nexari bodies arranged in ceremonial positions around jungle clearings. HFY was not just honoring our dead, Velthar said. She was sending us messages using our own funeral customs. The way she arranged the bodies told us tactical information. The young officers looked shocked. A body facing north meant enemy forces coming from that direction, Velthar explained. 3 bodies in a triangle meant prepare for attack in 3 days. She was using our religious ceremonies as a communication system. He walked closer to the young officers. After 8 months, we received orders to retreat from Verdania 3, Velthar said. We had lost over half our soldiers. We had never found the human base. We had never even seen most of the human soldiers. A young officer asked, What happened to Major Kyung-ho and his people? They vanished back into the jungle, Velthar replied. When our reinforcements arrived 6 months later to try again, they found no trace of human presence. It was as if the humans had never been there. He began putting the jungle plants back in the cloth bag. But they left us one message, Velthar continued. Carved into a tree near our original landing site in perfect Nexari script. What did it say? Lieutenant Kremol asked. Velthar closed the bag and walked toward the door. It said, This is our world now. You were just visiting, he replied. And below that it said, Signed, the Ghosts of Verdania 3. He paused at the door. Tomorrow I will tell you the final story, he said, about the peace negotiations and why they were the most frightening thing of all. The door closed behind him, leaving the young officers alone with their thoughts about humans who could become invisible, who could eat poison, who could turn an entire jungle into their... On the 5th day, Commander Velthar entered the briefing room empty-handed. The young officers had been expecting another box of artifacts or weapons, but he carried nothing except a single sheet of paper. Admiral Thexandra followed him into the room. Her old face was serious, and she walked slowly to the front of the room with her metal walking stick. "Today we tell you about the end of the war," Velthar said, "and why it was the beginning of our real fears about humanity." He held up the sheet of paper. "This is the peace treaty that ended the human-Nexari integration wars," he said. "It was signed 3 years after the fighting started, but the war did not end because we won." Lieutenant Kremall looked confused. "Sir, we captured 12 human worlds. We destroyed 60 human ships. Our history books say we were victorious." Admiral Thexandra made a sound that might have been laughter, but it was not happy. "Our history books lie," she said simply. The young officers looked shocked. "The war ended because the humans asked us to stop fighting," Velthar continued. "They sent a diplomat named Ambassador Minho to negotiate peace." He pressed a button on his control pad. A hologram showed a middle-aged human male in simple clothes, sitting at a conference table. "Minho came to our capital world alone," Velthar said. "No guards, no weapons, no warships. Just one human in a small transport ship." A young officer asked, "Was he surrendering?" "That is what we thought," Admiral Thexandra replied. "We were wrong." The hologram showed the peace negotiations. Human and Nexari diplomats sitting across from each other in a large meeting room. "Ambassador Minho brought something with him," Velthar said. "A data pad containing information about human military capabilities." He paused and looked around the room at the young faces. "What he showed us changed everything we thought we knew about the war," Velthar continued. Lieutenant Kremall leaned forward. "What kind of information?" "Details about human weapons we had never seen," Velthar replied. "Battle plans for attacks that had never been launched. Technology that had never been used." The hologram changed to show technical drawings of strange human devices. "The humans had been holding back," Admiral Thexandra said. "For 3 years of war, they had been fighting us with only a small part of their real military power." The young officers looked confused. "But why?" asked a young officer. "If they could have won the war, why did they let us capture their worlds?" Velthar's expression grew very serious. "Because they were testing us," he said. "They were learning how we fight, how we think, how we make decisions. Every battle we won was giving them information about our weaknesses." The hologram showed human soldiers recording battle data even while they were dying. "General Wu Jin was the human military commander," Velthar continued. "He had been documenting everything. Every weapon we used, every tactic we tried, every mistake we made." The hologram showed a stern human male in military uniform studying battle reports. "General Wu Jin told Ambassador Minho that humans had learned enough," Velthar said. "They knew exactly how to defeat us completely, but they chose not to." Admiral Thexandra walked closer to the young officers. "Ambassador Minho showed us something during the peace talks," she said. "A recording from General Wu Jin explaining human military doctrine." A new hologram appeared showing General Wu Jin standing in front of a tactical display. The general explained that humans have 2 ways of fighting, Velthar said. "Limited warfare and total warfare." Lieutenant Kremall asked, "What is the difference?" "Limited warfare is what we had been experiencing," Velthar replied. "Humans fighting to test enemy capabilities while minimizing their own losses. Total warfare is when humans decide that the enemy must be completely destroyed." The hologram showed images from human history, ancient battlefields and modern war zones. "General Wu Jin told us that humans had been practicing limited warfare against us," Velthar continued. "They were being careful not to damage our civilian populations or destroy our cultural centers." A young officer asked, "Why would they care about our civilians?" "Because they were hoping we could become allies someday," Admiral Thexandra replied. "Humans always think about what happens after the war ends." The hologram changed to show peaceful human and Nexari colonies. But General Wu Jin also showed us what human total warfare looks like, Velthar said, his voice becoming very quiet. The young officers waited. He showed us recordings from human civil wars, Velthar continued. Humans fighting other humans with no restrictions, no mercy, no limits. The hologram showed images that made the young officers feel sick. Cities turned to ash. Entire populations disappeared. Humans had weapons that could destroy planets, Velthar said. Biological weapons that could kill every living thing on a world. Psychological warfare techniques that could drive entire species insane. Lieutenant Kremal shook his head. That is impossible. Is it? Admiral Thexandra asked. We saw humans turn their own bodies into bombs. We saw them eat poison to survive. We saw them use their dead friends as weapons. What do you think they would do if they stopped caring about keeping us alive? The room became very quiet. Dr. Unji was the human psychologist who studied post-war trauma, Velthar continued. She came to our worlds after the peace treaty, to help Nexari soldiers who had been damaged by fighting humans. The hologram showed a kind-looking human female in a medical coat. Dr. Yunji told us something interesting, Velthar said. She said that humans who had fought us were suffering from a type of mental stress she had never seen before. A young officer asked, "What kind of stress?" "Guilt," Velthar replied. The human soldiers felt guilty about holding back during the war. They felt like they had failed their duty by not fighting us with full strength. The young officers looked shocked. Humans felt bad about being merciful to us, Admiral Thexandra explained. Their natural instinct was to destroy us completely, but their leaders had ordered them to show restraint. Velthar walked to the window and looked out at the training grounds where young Nexari soldiers were practicing combat. Ambassador Minho gave us a choice during the peace talks, he said. We could continue the war and face human total warfare, or we could accept peace and join the galactic community as equals. What would have happened if we had chosen to continue fighting? Lieutenant Kremal asked. Velthar turned away from the window. General Wu Jin estimated that complete Nexari extinction would take approximately 18 months, he said. Not defeat. Extinction. The complete elimination of our species from the galaxy. The young officers sat in stunned silence. But he also estimated that humans would lose about 40% of their military in the process. Velthar continued. They were willing to accept those losses to eliminate what they saw as a threat to galactic peace. Admiral Thexandra sat down heavily in a chair. That is why we signed the peace treaty, she said. Not because we were losing the war we were fighting, but because we realized we had never been fighting the real war at all. Velthar held up the peace treaty document. This paper saved our species, he said. But it also taught us the most frightening thing about humans. What is that? Asked a young officer. They could have killed us all from the very beginning, Velthar replied. Every day we were alive during the war was because humans chose to let us live. He walked back to the front of the room. Humans fight 2 wars at the same time, he continued. The war they are fighting, and the war they could be fighting. They always hold back their worst weapons because they are always thinking about what kind of galaxy they want to live in after the war ends. Lieutenant Kremal raised one of his 3 hands. Sir, if humans are so dangerous, why do we work with them now? Why are they allowed to join the galactic community? Velthar and Admiral Thexandra looked at each other. Because the alternative is worse, Admiral Thexandra said. Humans as enemies would eventually kill us all. Humans as allies might keep us alive, Velthar nodded. For 20 years humans have been peaceful, he said. They share their technology. They help settle disputes between other species. They explore new worlds and invite everyone to benefit from what they find. He paused. But every day, human soldiers train for wars they hope they will never fight. Velthar continued. Every day human scientists develop weapons they hope they will never use. Every day humans prepare for the possibility that someone will force them to stop being merciful. The hologram showed current images of human space, peaceful colonies and research stations. The humans we fought 20 years ago are still alive, Velthar said. Dongmin's brother is now a human general. Dr. So Young's daughter is a military engineer. Hyunsu's friends are teaching the next generation of human soldiers. Lieutenant Kremol looked confused. What does that mean? It means that humans remember everything, Velthar replied. They remember how to turn civilians into warriors. They remember how to make their deaths count for something. They remember how to fight wars that other species cannot even imagine. He walked toward the door. You asked me yesterday why I teach these classes, Velthar said. It is not to make you afraid of humans. It is to make sure you never give them a reason to stop being our friends. Admiral Thexandra stood up slowly. Every species in the galaxy now knows what we learned, she said. Humans are the kindest species we have ever met. They are also the... So young Park found the alien students in the library the next morning, looking confused and tired. Well, as tired as beings who did not sleep in the human way could look. She was a 22-year-old xenobiology student who had volunteered to help show the aliens around campus during their stay. Good morning, she said cheerfully, carrying a large cup of coffee and a bag full of textbooks. Taemin asked me to give you a tour today. I hope you are ready for an interesting day. Vextar looked up from a data tablet, where complex calculations were scrolling across the screen. We have been attempting to understand human sleep patterns and work efficiency. The numbers do not make sense. What numbers? So Young asked, sitting down across from them. Your coordinator Taemin worked for 14 hours without rest, then completed marathon training, and now he is attending classes, Morthak explained. According to our biological models, he should have collapsed. So Young laughed. Taemin is pretty tough, but that is normal for finals week. Wait until you see what other students are doing. She led them out of the library and across the campus. It was early morning, but the university was already busy with activity. Students hurried between buildings, many carrying multiple bags and looking like they had not slept much either. This is what we call finals week, So Young explained as they walked. Students take their biggest tests and finish their most important projects all in the same few days. It is very stressful, but somehow everyone manages. They stopped outside the engineering building where Dongwoo Lee was sitting on the steps with his laptop. He had textbooks spread around him, was eating instant ramen from a cup, and had his phone pressed to his ear. While talking to someone, in rapid Korean, he was also typing code and occasionally helping another student who kept asking questions. Dongwoo has been here since yesterday afternoon, So Young said quietly. He is working on 3 different programming projects, talking to his family back home, and helping his study group prepare for their exam. Quindar's insect eyes focused on the scene. How can he process so many different tasks simultaneously? The hive mind requires dedicated processing units for each complex function. Humans call it multitasking, So Young replied. We are not always the best at it, but we try to do many things at once when we need to. As they watched, Dongwoo finished his phone call, closed one program on his computer, opened another, took a big bite of ramen, and started helping his friend solve a math problem. He did all of this while looking completely calm and even making jokes. His stress levels should be critically high, Vextar observed, scanning Dongwoo with a small device. But his vital signs show he is actually relaxed. Dongwoo loves challenges, So Young said. Some humans actually perform better when they have more to do. They continued walking and came to the medical school building. Through a window, they could see Ha Young Choi surrounded by anatomy books, medical charts, and note cards. She had been studying in the same spot for hours, occasionally taking sips from a large water bottle. Ha Young is preparing for her biggest exam of the year, So Young explained. After this, she will go volunteer at the blood drive in the student center. She does that every month. Lyra's energy form pulsed with confusion. She will perform voluntary labor after intensive mental work? Why would she expend additional energy unnecessarily? Because people need blood donations to stay healthy, So Young said simply. Ha Young studies medicine because she wants to help people. Volunteering is part of that goal. As they talked, Ha Young looked up and waved at them through the window. She smiled brightly despite having studied for most of the night. When she saw the alien students, she gathered some of her materials and came outside to meet them. You must be our visitors from other worlds, Ha Young said, bowing politely. Welcome to our university. I hope you are learning interesting things about humans. We are learning that humans do not follow logical efficiency patterns, Morthak replied. Ha-Young laughed. Probably not. We do what feels right rather than what makes the most sense sometimes. But how do you maintain such energy levels? Vexitar asked. Our calculations suggest you should be operating at diminished capacity. I am tired, Ha-Young admitted. But I am also excited about my exam and happy to help with the blood drive later. When you care about something, you find energy. You did not know you had. She excused herself to return to studying, leaving the aliens even more puzzled than before. The real shock came that afternoon when they witnessed Jiho Nam's daily routine. The chemistry student finished his final exam at 2 in the afternoon, sprinted across campus to his part-time job at a local restaurant, worked a full 6-hour shift serving customers, then returned to campus to help organize a charity fundraiser for students who could not afford textbooks. So-Young and the aliens watched from across the quad as Jiho set up tables, arranged donation boxes, and convinced other tired students to volunteer their time and money for a good cause. He did all of this while cracking jokes and maintaining a positive attitude that seemed to energize everyone around him. He completed a difficult examination, performed physical labor for 6 hours, and now he is organizing a complex social activity, Quindar observed. Yet his behavior suggests he is enjoying himself. Jiho is always like this, So-Young said. He says being busy keeps him happy. When he has nothing to do, he gets restless and bored. By the end of the day, the alien students had filled their data tablets with observations that contradicted everything they thought they knew about biological limitations and efficient behavior. They returned to their dormitory rooms confused and fascinated. That evening, they met to compare their notes. Each species had different ways of processing information, but they all reached the same conclusion. Humans were doing things that should be impossible. Their energy expenditure far exceeds their input, Vextar reported. They consume minimal nutrition and rest, yet maintain peak performance for extended periods. They engage in voluntary activities that provide no direct benefit to themselves, Morthak added. This behavior should have been eliminated by natural selection. Lyra's glow shifted to a thoughtful purple. They seem to draw energy from social interactions and personal satisfaction, rather than purely from physical resources. Quindar made clicking sounds that indicated deep thinking. Most puzzling is their apparent improvement under stress conditions. Logic suggests they should become less capable when faced with multiple challenges, but observation shows the opposite. So-Young found them in the common room later that evening, still discussing their findings. She was carrying a stack of books and looked tired but satisfied. How was your first real day observing human behavior? She asked. Confusing, Vextar replied honestly. We expected to catalog primitive survival strategies, but instead we are documenting capabilities that seem to exceed our own species' achievements. So-Young smiled. Maybe that is because you are looking for logic in the wrong places. Humans do not always do things because they make sense. We do them because they feel important. As she headed upstairs to her room, the aliens realized their research was going to require completely new frameworks for understanding intelligent behavior. Whatever humans were doing, it was working in ways their science could not yet explain. Diafon. Next few days promised to reveal even more surprises.